Thank you very much for listening to this week's talk on the Sedras of Behar and Bechukotai, the two concluding Sedras of the book of Vayikra, and we are dedicating our learning to the safety and success of all of the soldiers in the IDF and the US armed forces as they continue their heroic struggle against evil, and the speedy healing of all the wounded, and the refuah sheleima of Rivka Yittel bas Rochel, and Le'iloi Nishmas R Meir David ben Shneur Zalman on the conclusion of the shloshim. And as we look at these two sedras, which are most years read the penultimate week before Shavuot, we see the opportunity to look at them as a unit. These two sedras, which seem to contain very different subjects, and we can see them as preparation, a very important preparation for the receiving of the Torah that we are going to relive on the festival of Shavuot. And starting first with Behar. Behar opens with the mitzvah of Shemitah, the sabbatical year, as the Jewish people are being prepared for their entry into the land of Israel. And the verse opens, chapter 25 of Vayikra, verse 1, V'yadaber Hashem el Moshe Behar Sinai Lemor, and Hashem said to Moshe at Mount Sinai, saying, Daber el Bnei Yisrael, va'amarta aleihem, speak to the children of Israel, and you will say to them, Ki sovo el ha'aretz asher ani nosein lochem, when you will come to the land that I am giving to you, v'shavsa ha'aretz Shabbos laHashem, and the land should rest a Shabbos to God. And Rashi comments, why does the mitzvah of Shemitah have the introduction of being said at Har Sinai? So Rashi says, Ma inyan Shemitah etzel Har Sinai. Why is the matter of Shemitah mentioned in connection with Har Sinai? V'halo kol ha-mitzvahs ne'emru miSinai. Weren't all the mitzvahs said at Sinai? Ella Ma Shemitah nemra klalaseha uprataseha v'diktukeha miSinai. Just like Shemitah was said with all of the rules and the particular details at Mount Sinai, af kulam nemru klalasehem v'diktukeha miSinai. So too all the mitzvahs were given in their specific detail at Sinai. And it is making the point that this mitzvah of Shemitah, and it's using Shemitah as the paradigm, because Rashi goes on to say that all of the mitzvahs actually were given in their entirety at Mount Sinai, but somehow Shemitah is the one that is used as the example. And if we look at the mitzvah of Shemitah, which requires, and remembering that this was given at a time of a society that was based on agriculture, that was based on land holdings, and every seventh year there was the requirement to leave the land completely fallow and to declare all of the produce of that year as hefker, which means ownerless. So any person could go onto any piece of land and reap the produce that was growing there. And if we think about the practical and psychological ramifications of this mitzvah, that first of all, practically speaking, it lasted an entire year. This requirement to stop working your land and let anybody go onto your land and take your produce, or what you thought of as your produce, to just take it. And this required huge emunah in Hashem, emunah in the sense that you would actually have enough to eat, enough to feed your family, and emunah that you are going to be able to survive the ensuing year after the seventh year, because while you didn't work in the seventh year, the crops for the 8th year were going to be affected as well. And so this is requiring absolute resolve and steadfast faith in Hashem, that the predictions and the promises in the Torah, that Hashem will command his blessing and there will be sufficient effectively, that the produce of the 6th year is going to be able to last for 3 years, the 6th year, the 7th year, and the 8th year. And so this mitzvah is perhaps for that reason, given the duration of the mitzvah and the very deep change in the routine of being busy with your own land and your produce and feeling that you have earned it and that it's yours. So on so many levels, very deep levels, Shemitah is really making this point. The point is that everything belongs to Hashem, that the land that I think is mine and the produce that I think is mine is actually a gift from Hashem. And Hashem has asked of me that every 7th year I have to reinforce that point by standing back and letting that be considered ownerless. And I think that this is such an effective way of making people realize who the true Bal Habayit is, who the true owner is of everything that we have. And if we are going to go slightly further ahead, the next basic topic is a 3-stage description of how we are obliged to help anybody who has fallen on hard times. And the phrase that's used is Ki yomuch ochicha. And we find this in the first time round, we find it in chapter 25, verse 25. And Ki yomuch ochicha umacha me'achuzaso. If your fellow Jew becomes destitute and he sells some of his landholding. So we see the first level of somebody who has fallen on hard times. And we are being asked to be sensitive to help him out, because at this first stage, he has still got some property, he's still got some way of sustaining himself, but he is obviously he is struggling. And so at that point, if we can intervene and help him, then we could prevent an even greater disaster, which unfortunately seems to happen when this phrase is repeated, Ki yomuch ochicha. And we find this in chapter 25, verse 35. V'chi yomuch ochicha umata yodo imach. If your fellow becomes destitute or needy and his hand is wavering and he stretches out his hand with you, and you should strengthen him. And again, this second stage is showing greater lack, greater need, greater levels of destitution, because a hand is being outstretched and is shaking, and the distress that this causes is much more significant. And unfortunately, it has got to a more severe critical stage. This is the second time. And then the third time we see this phrase, this is chapter 25, verse 39. V'chi yomuch ochicha imoch v'nimkar loch. And when your brother with you becomes destitute, v'nimkar loch, and he is sold to you. So at this stage, unfortunately, the levels of destitution and financial collapse have got to a point where the individual has had to sell himself. And I think that this description of somebody who has fallen on such hard times comes after the mitzvah of Shemitah, because the mitzvah of Shemitah has prepared us to understand that just because I have something and I am doing well, then that actually is not something that belongs to me, but a responsibility that I have to enable somebody else who, for whatever reason, has fallen on hard times, and I am in a position to help. I need to look out. So if I can see, if I can identify this level of destitution at the first stage, then anything that I can do is going to prevent the greater crisis. But I have been prepared to be sensitive and to be able to part with my own, in inverted, property, because I have learnt through observing Shemitah that I keep one of the actual practical mitzvahs of the Torah that was singled out as the example of all of the details being given at Mount Sinai. But that has enabled me to actually be sensitive and help in a situation beyond Shemitah. So the mitzvah of Shemitah applies every seventh year. But the mitzvah of being sensitive to the needs of somebody who has fallen on hard times is applicable throughout. And we have had the best tutorial to be able to do this from the observing the mitzvah of Shemitah. But if we then go ahead to the Sedra of Bechukotai, the Sedra of Bechukotai details the blessings that accrue in Bechukotai Telechu. If you walk, literally, if you walk in my statutes. Now that's a very strange sounding translation, but it is faithful to the Hebrew words. And we then go on to see the 10 Pesukim from chapter 26, verse 3 to verse 13, detail the blessings that accrue when we walk in the ways of Hashem, when we follow all of the different mitzvahs of the Torah. And then from verse 14 through to verse 43, we have a total of 29 Pesukim that detail in very stark and brutal, infinite particulars that we see the consequences that occur if we fail to observe the mitzvahs. And I think, again, the lessons that we've learned from observing Shemitah are going to help us, going to prevent us falling into this trap. Because although historically we have suffered the descriptions of the absolute terrors that befall the Jewish people when they don't observe the Torah, but if we can benefit, look at the lessons of history, look at this structure of the Torah, of the concluding sedras of the book of Vayikra, and if we look at the very last pasuk of the sedra of Bechukotai, and it reverts back full circle to the opening sedra, to the opening pasuk of the sedra of Behar. Ele hamitzvos asher tziva Hashem es Moshe el bnei Yisrael Behar Sinai. These are the mitzvahs that Hashem commanded Moshe to the children of Israel at Mount Sinai. And that takes us back to this mitzvah of Shemitah that taught us one, if not the ultimate lesson, one of the ultimate lessons of Emunah. And we end off these two sedras with the words chazak, chazak, v'nis chazek. And we always need this double dose, triple dose of strengthening ourselves. And we are able to acquire that by learning these lessons and by implementing them in our daily lives. And this is something that is true for all times. And please God, we should be able to observe the land of Shemitah, to observe the laws of Shemitah, as mandated by the Torah, speedily and in our times, with the rebuilding of the Beis Hamikdash, with most of the Jewish people living in the land of Israel. But until such time, we have got the psychology, the wisdom, and the attitude that prepare us to be ready for this great time. Thank you very much for listening and wishing everybody Shabbat Shalom.